Welcome to Trials, Tales and Trails, a podcast for life sciences, healthcare and clinical trials. Our guests tell the tales, and trails we record from a Volkswagen camper van. Hello there and welcome to another new episode of Trials, Tales and Trails. This is another on-the-road episode of the podcast. Chris and I were lucky enough to be invited to the Clinical Outsourcing Group's UK event. Clinical Outsourcing Group is a really interesting series of events. They do several events around the world each year. They pride themselves on having a high ratio of buyers to providers, and it's really worth checking out one of their events if there's one happening near you. While there, we spoke with Gary Quashie about his recent return from the US to the UK and some of his experiences while he was out in California. So please welcome Gary Quashie to Trials, Tales and Trails. Here we are with Gary Quashie. You were telling me earlier that you've just moved back to the UK from San Francisco.
Yeah.
And like this confused look on our faces. It's like, hang on a minute, what's going on?
You doing there? Yeah. So I moved actually just in the past 2-3 months or so. Essentially, I moved out to San Francisco about 6 years ago through Global Data. It's an organization where we have a ton of researchers that go out into the market and try to find out anything and everything to do with clinical trials, what sites they're being run at, which sites are performing well, why are company trials failing, all that kind of good stuff. So luckily I got to speak with a lot of biotech and pharma and CRO coming to conferences just like this one. And then from there, after about 3 years, I moved to ParXL, another CRO, and that was my entry into clinical research. And I think it did a lot for my interactions with companies because, you know, I'm speaking to them based on the data I know about what they're trying to do, challenges they're facing. So it was an interesting kind of round that way.
But tell us about the move back then. So, you know, San Francisco, it's like, hang on a minute, I'm staying. But you were there?
I was in San Francisco for 6 years in the end. Yeah, it's crazy to think because it feels like I was there for like a year or so.
It's kind of like tenure gets extended.
Yeah.
But obviously you came back for the winter. So
You know, glorious, love the grey. yeah. But yeah, no, it's been interesting because I think moving out there, I had a great opportunity to learn a lot, you know, because, you know, they say Silicon Valley, and then of course I was in San Francisco, but then I was also in Oakland, and there's a big disparity in the, you know, the standard of living for communities out there. So it was a bit of a shock to me when I first moved out there, saw the homeless communities, living there, but then at the same time, you know, you type in on Eventbrite, clinical trials, investors, or whatever, and you've got the UN and top CEOs and VCs coming to the area just to have a chat. And there was a group that I was volunteering for, and essentially they go out into the communities to help people get access to healthcare who don't have insurance. So it was quite an interesting dynamic, like being out in the community, working in clinical trials, you know, seeing the disparity there, and then like all my family, my friends, everyone I know is back in the UK. So I'm like, gosh, I'm doing all this stuff out here. I'm quite keen to take what I know and bring it back home.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what inspired.
That is, you know what? And that's because you've been out there. You know, you get there after a few years, you get to know the systems, right? And so you're moving back here now. What are your views on the cuts to Medicare and Medicaid? Because that's what you hear all the time.
Yeah.
How's that happening? Yeah. What's your views on that?
Honestly, it's really sad because I think there's from what I've seen, there's the policy and what's happening, and then there's people's perspective on that. I mean, in the States, it's quite hard to. I mean, anyway, it's hard to get 350 million people to use the same system. There's disagreements, and so from what I found, there were some people who I'd speak to who were very much in favor of me, and then there were others who were totally against it. I think the main thing really is to initially try and get more people to agree on what is the right way to go about things. But it is sad to see the amount of research the biotech and pharma that's happening out there in California is insane.
So you've obviously moved into Excel. What do you think the finance were that you were able to take from your kind of like right immersed in the world of data into a CRO kind of arena?
I think it was interesting that for me, going in, speaking to companies, you know, they come to us with a project and they give you the directive. This is what we need, when we need it by, and that's it. But I think coming from the market data analytics piece meant that I'd look at their project in the context of what else is happening. So it wasn't just, okay, let me do your project. It's, okay, but why are you doing it that way? Are you aware of these other companies that you're competing with? Are you aware of, you know, 20% of these trials didn't complete because of poor enrollment? Do you want to take a look at your inclusion exclusion criteria? So it was like I could kind of go into conversations bringing outside of what's in the document to them. So quite a lot of the time it led to really good conversations where, you know, they're introducing more people from their team so that we can try and work out what is the actual best strategy.
And it's turning into action. I'm just trying to think, in your time of being out there, you had a global pandemic, you had FDA directive about pollution, so it must have been phenomenal times being in California with biotech.
Honestly, I think it was, I mean, there was, like you said, so many things. Like, I remember one day waking up and being like, what is going on? I'm in an environment in California.
Yeah. God knows how long.
It was bizarre. It's like the world's ending. This is nuts. And also, you know, lots of people thought that the pandemic was working at an information provider.
Yeah.
We thought we had all the information. But oh, this would blow over in a couple months or so. Obviously, it didn't. And then there were so many things like even you know, the George Floyd incident and that as well, which was and especially in a town like Oakland, where, you know, you've got people marching, and I mean, it was beautiful to see the community come together.
Right.
But it did a lot for, like, in my head, I'm like, gosh, there's a lot happening in the world that it's easy to ignore if you're wherever you are, based on the people you're around, and you can be in your own bubble. And it was weird because I was in a bubble, not around my own group. So I do think it changed a lot about the way that I see things around that time. So, you know, you speak to someone else who's been through something like that in the past, you think, gosh, like, there's so much that's happened. Like, how much are things changing?
Yeah.
And it begs the question. I like to think things are improving in a number of areas, because it's easy to talk about how bad something is, but the context of how, you know, on a graph, is it getting better or worse, is really important. But I think that's where, like, things like this podcast that you guys are doing add so much context to people's way of seeing things. So
yeah, and do you know what? It's an industry that gets such a bad reputation. Certainly, and you wouldn't have seen this in the UK. The culture changed through COVID, where people were staying on the streets, applauding and clapping NHS work. So it's kind of to get that whole feeling and appreciation.
And where does it go after things? And does it just go away?
right, that's the thing. Yeah.
So for you, still in San Francisco, moved across, what's prompted the move back over this side of the pond again?
So I've been thinking for some time about whether I wanted to stay in the States or not. I mean, honestly, moving out there was a bit of a, opportunity came up. It's going to take me before it goes, and I guess over time, I've been thinking, do I want to stay here? Do I want to be settled here? And every year or 2 years, it was like, okay, I'll renew my living in California subscription, and then at some point, I would say, last year, the year before last, 2022, I've been thinking, okay, I'm not sure. Maybe I would move back. And then kind of some family stuff come up, some good, some bad. And then the opportunity came up for me to be in the UK. And I think it just felt like the right time. It felt like I'd been there for a stint of, basically 5 years was when I was thinking, okay, I'm going to move soon. And when I moved out to California, I tried to tell myself, go there with the mentality that you're there to learn and grow. Imagine you're doing like a 2-year degree, which became a 3-year degree, which became like a 5-year PhD. I'm like, I need to do something with this.
There is a point somewhere where there's a tipping point of like, where is home? Kind of where is
my
Yes.
base. I love how you termed it as a California subscription.
Yeah.
It's like,
It's Netflix.
it's like Spotify. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think I'll renew for another year.
Just in time for the UK's full week of good weather. I mean,
I know. Seriously, I got soaked this morning. I was like, oh, I'm home. Yeah. So,
Listen, Gary, thanks for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Like, absolutely great to meet you.
thank you.
Thanks for listening, and please get in touch with feedback, suggestions for future guests, or to inquire about sponsorship opportunities. You can subscribe using your go-to podcast provider or follow at trialstalesandtrails.com. On behalf of all participants, views expressed are our own and not necessarily those of our employers, past, present, or future. Trials, Tales and Trails was written by Andy Thurston and Chris Wells and produced by Andy Thurston.